story of Upbuild began in a monastery. On our quest to understand ourselves more deeply, we recognize that it is our attachment to our egos, our identities, that gets in the way of being our true selves. This podcast will help you understand your ego. It will help you better understand your inner world, the motivations, insecurities, and emotions that affect your every action and relationship. Welcome to Upbuilding the Self. Hi everyone, this is Vipin, and I'm here with my partner Rasanath. Hi Rasanath.
Hey Vipin.
Rasanath, you're in Canada with your father-in-law right now. How are you both doing?
Doing all right, all things considered. He went through a brain surgery 5-6 weeks ago, and which was a very intense experience. And I guess for me and for him, a reminder of our mortality and our time together. And I'm back here again. He's recovered remarkably well. And my hope is to bring him back to New York to spend some time with us and then figure out how we create an infrastructure for him that he's taken care of moving forward.
Well, please convey my regards to him.
Thank you. I will.
Hope to see him soon.
Yeah, well, he always asks about you, and hopefully during your next visit to New York, he'll still be here in New York.
I hope so. So our topic for today is validation, a word whose frequency in my vocabulary increased dramatically since joining Upbuild 6-7 years ago. And you emailed our team over the weekend that the topic of how to accept that we need validation from the outside world has been coming up in so many of your coaching sessions recently. And you were inspired to record a podcast about it. So here we are.
Well, thank you for accepting it.
I was really excited about the topic, and I'm excited to learn about the topic, deepen my understanding, and really get to some nuances and subtleties here. Let's start with what is validation. Could we define what we're talking about? I pulled up the definition in the Oxford Dictionary, which says validation is recognition or affirmation that a person or their feelings or opinions are valid or worthwhile. There's a need for acceptance that is being met here when we're validated. What more would you say about that definition? How does that resonate with how you think about it?
I think that's a very accurate and I think well understood definition of validation, even when we use the term validation without explicitly defining it. People can relate to what it means: recognition, appreciation, understanding, and essentially being validated for who I think I am or what I think I'm going through.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And validation essentially has a deeper sense of being seen and acknowledged. And then it takes different forms, like being recognized for, being understood, being appreciated for, all of that. They are different variations of validation. But ultimately, the definition that you gave is a pretty accurate and, I think, well understood definition of validation. The tricky part about validation, and this is what has been coming up in so many of my coaching conversations, is a very complicated relationship with validation. I have been exploring that with so many clients, and it seems like the complexity arises from how much we need it, and at the same time, how we don't want to need it. We want it and we don't want it at the same time.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because when you said recognition, appreciation, understanding, my first thought was those seem like pretty universal needs. I mean, of course, we need those things. I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that. And when you said we need and then we don't want to need, I imagine that any needs we have make us feel vulnerable. So we don't want to have any needs for that matter. And validation is among.
Right, absolutely. But also, this is, I think, what makes validation such a powerful piece to unpack. Because validation ultimately is tied very deeply to a core human need of wanting to be mirrored. You might have heard the term mirroring used in psychology quite a bit. And we might have talked about or heard about mirroring if, some of us are parents. In parenting, they typically use the word mirroring, mirror your child is something that you hear about, or even thinking about our own childhood where you mirrored accurately.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the idea of mirroring is so fundamental to understanding validation. And what is mirroring ultimately? Mirroring is essentially having a mirror that reflects back. It's so simple. We all use mirrors every day. And now we have our phones that can act as mirrors too because they have cameras. But the idea behind mirroring is something that reflects back to you so that then you can see yourself. And the reason why that is such a fundamental human need is because just like we would be able to see different parts of our body without a mirror, but it's impossible to see our face without our mirror. The face is the biggest part of our identity in terms of how somebody recognizes us. And that part we can only see when we have a mirror in front of us.
To extend that metaphor, the reason we can't see it is it's the closest to our eyes.
It's
And
true.
so we have no direct ability to see it. And
Yeah,
so when we think about where we need mirroring in our lives, it's likely to be places that are so close, we're so close to that we can't actually
we
see.
can see it. Well said. That is exactly it. And so it makes it so fundamental to existence, just like we would have a mirror at home so that we can see those parts of us that we otherwise can't see. That is exactly what happens to our deepest sense of identity. We need something outside of us to reflect back to us because we can't really see ourselves. We can only see ourselves through the eyes of someone or something that is outside of us.
Yeah, yeah. And what's so important about being able to see ourselves?
Our sense of identity. Who am I? Which is so core to our existence. And that sense of I-ness only being completed when somebody else can complete that for me. In this case, a mirror reflecting back to me as to who I am. Right? So the simplest way I can say it, how do I look? Right?
Right, right,
I need a mirror.
right. So, I mean, what you're suggesting is we don't actually know who we are without being mirrored.
Yeah, completing the definition. I may have, just like I can look at other parts of my body and perhaps construct a sense of identity. Again, the deepest part, if I were to go back to that analogy, the way people typically recognize me is by looking at my face, my eyes, like, and that part needs a mirror to be understood. So it's very similar now if we were to extend that to who am I on a very existential level. Right? And the only way I can truly complete that understanding is when somebody outside of me completes it.
Right. You could say that, okay, I'm a son, I'm a father, I'm a partner at Upbuild. I went to these schools and worked in these places and a bunch of things that are part of your identity. And even some adjectives that might just you would use to describe yourself. But what you're saying is who you are underneath those, how you do those things, how you're showing up, how do people experience you? All of that is a bit more opaque until it's reflected back to you.
That's right. That's exactly it. Like the qualities that I possess.
The qualities, yeah. And that can be reflected back in words or just in someone's presence, in the way that they respond to you, you're getting clues. And that's all different types of mirroring.
Yeah. So ultimately, you could say, and this is what we were discussing earlier too, that validation is a very important part of the expression of love, because love is an exchange, love is mirroring back, right? And then that can happen in multiple ways. Words of affirmation, one way. The five love languages talk about different ways of being validated in a relationship. But all of that actually completes, in some ways, my sense of identity in that relationship, and also my sense of identity fundamentally as a person. Because every relationship somehow is a reflection of who I am as a person. And so it gets pretty complex when it comes to that level.
Well, we're saying that clearly validation is an innate need. So, what is the complexity? Why is there such a complex relationship with validation? You said earlier we can't live without it, and yet we don't want to live with it either. Like, why is there such a difficult relationship?
It is difficult because I am constantly trying to find who I am and how I'm doing in the context of so many different relationships, right? And so the context itself creates the complexity, because if I need the mirror to show me my sense of identity, going back to the analogy that we talked about, then I'm dependent on my environment. And based on the environment is reflecting back to me accurately or not. And there are so many shades in between. I feel so hopelessly dependent on my environment to complete that sense of identity. And so I don't like the dependency on my environment, which is why I feel like, I need this and I don't want to need it, because I can't trust my environment fully to provide that for me. And yet I am dependent on my environment to complete that for me. And that's our conundrum. And we can't necessarily articulate it that way, but that is what I have discovered in thinking about validation, talking about the idea of validation and appreciation with so many people. It's this I can live with it, but I can't also live without it.
One thing that struck me as you were saying this is that, I'm engaging in these different environments at home, at work, and I'm engaging with other people. And presumably, it's not really about me. I'm either trying to get some work done, I'm trying to serve someone in my family. And the point, as you described our need for validation, it's striking that I'm in these environments and actually I'm trying to get something out of it, whether explicit or implicit. I need something from that interaction, from that context, from that environment. And that, well, two things. One, if I'm trying to get certain validation and that becomes obvious to others, it feels like, well, why don't I just say what I need instead of trying to get something without expressing that I need that thing? And I imagine that that can cause conflict. And then also, even just for myself, like I'd like to be able to just do my job or serve other people in as pure a way as possible. And yet, if I'm finding myself, the voices in my head say like, "Hey, you're not being seen. You're not getting what you need here." All of a sudden, that's getting in the way of my service, and that feels again in conflict. So I'd rather just not need any of that and be able to just be and do.
That is exactly right, which is why it makes it such a complex navigate. Because when we do acknowledge that we need validation, and we can talk about that more, when we do acknowledge that we need validation, maybe we can actually choose how to pursue it in the context of relationship in a more healthy way, right? Because it takes some humility to acknowledge that. And even when we are showing up to serve the other person, the acknowledgement that I am not, in that sense of the term, completely selfless. and at the same time, also recognizing that the other person is not obligated to validate me the way I want to be validated. It takes acknowledgement, humility, and a healthy pursuit of how we can ask for validation.
To make this really concrete, can you share an example or two, either from some of your coaching experiences or from your own life? Share with us this complexity of I can't live with it and I can't live without it comes to a fore.
It's present every day for me. I can share so many examples. So we started off this conversation today talking about my father-in-law and the situation with my father-in-law. And when he was in the ER about 6 weeks ago, I traveled from New York to Ottawa. Just like our life was on hold. And I was here for 3 weeks, just helping him like go through the surgery and the rehab portion. And what I discovered in the process was after the surgery, every time he was talking to people and he was acknowledging and feeling grateful for how many people had helped support him, there were times when he didn't necessarily speak about me. And that hurt. And here I am, like there in the hospital, showing up to like serve, right? And then also coming back home from the hospital and feeling like, well, am I not doing? And this was what I experienced was guilt. And the experience of guilt was maybe I should have come earlier. Maybe I should have been like all of those thoughts were going through my mind. I only came after he had gone to the ER. Maybe I didn't take the message seriously enough that I should have come like maybe like as soon as he was showing some signs that he was losing control on some of his muscles, that I should have just like, and so what does it mean to be a family member?
Right. So this question of am I doing enough? And actually, when he was sharing about his gratitude for all these people, and if he didn't mention you, you actually could take that as an indication that that was intentional, that if you had done enough, your name clearly would have come up. And so what are the things that I haven't done? And where am I falling short? Versus maybe he just, didn't mention my name in this one time, or it's because we're so close that it's almost taken for granted. But
Right.
it's very interesting where your mind went.
Right. And to then also, like, even if it was not he didn't intentionally mention it, maybe I didn't even make a dent by what I did. Because if I had done it, I would have it would have been that if the person felt that my presence was
They could never forget
serving, they couldn't forget me, right? So something happened here.
Aren't we all after that? How can we do things so that we're never forgettable?
So now you're trying to fix your past, you're trying to compensate for it in some way, and all of that, and going through your own sense of guilt in that relationship. Did I really show up properly? And all of the confusion that arises with not getting the validation the way I wanted to receive. I wanted to get it.
What did you do with that?
What did I do with it? I first of all acknowledged that this is a need.
Yourself?
Yeah, to acknowledge, wow, it was less about the mention. The mention was a form of validation, or him speaking about me. It was a form of validation. Now, here's the other caveat to it. It was not that he never spoke about it, but he didn't speak about it every time,
Right.
right?
You got random reinforcement.
which meant then when he spoke about it, I started doubting when he was speaking about it, like, is he saying that just because he needed to make me feel good versus, well, if he really felt it, he would have spoken about it every time. So look at how it gets very complicated, right? And so for me, one was to understand all of this that was happening, to actually have a laugh at it too, because of how we are wired and how, in the broader scheme of life and all the time that I've spent with him, how insignificant this is, and yet how significant it is, right? And then to acknowledge deep down, yeah, I need to be mirrored in this relationship. And the mirroring here is, am I being a son-in-law that I think I am? And all the adjectives that go along with the definition of what a good son-in-law can be. And acknowledging that that mirroring is what I'm not receiving right now, perhaps. And then asking myself the question, what is the truth that I'm doubting here? Did I do enough? Did I show up as I needed to show up? And then being able to talk to a couple of people about that. Did I do everything in my capacity here? Should I have done something before? Just being able to talk through that was very helpful.
This is a very evocative example, very helpful. Thank you. And when you think about this tension of I need the validation and I don't want to need it, it's clear that you acknowledged where you needed it. How did you experience wishing that you did not need it?
uh, it's happened, I guess, a couple of times in my relationship with my daughter. It's so interesting how even with a child, we want the child to mirror us back, right? Sometimes she will say things like, "Oh, you never do anything for me."
I
you
I
know,
feel like I've heard that myself.
you, you, as a 3, you never do anything for me, and especially when you're tired and you have done so much, it shocks your system even when you're hearing from a 3-year-old, "You never do this for me," and you just wish, wow, I just wish I didn't need that validation from her because it does upset you. I wish I just didn't need this. And sometimes it's also happened for me at the workplace, and others have shared this too, how I wish I never needed validation from my colleagues, right, or from my boss, because the feedback time at work is always a very sensitive time because so much is tied to that. When people, especially your boss, is giving you feedback, and the experience I've had many times, man, I wish I just never really needed that validation. I feel dependent on it, and I wish I didn't need it.
Very helpful. Thank you, Rasanath. So, can we talk about how this complexity of needing it and not wanting to need it shows up at work in particular? I know that you said this is coming up quite often in your coaching sessions, and I imagine a bunch of those situations are in the workplace. So, how does this complexity play out in the workplace? I mean, you gave this example of need feedback from one's boss is an example of that. What else did you had in mind about how this is showing up everywhere and what we need to do about it?
It shows up in pretty much all of our relationships that are important for us. Our overarching identity is comprised of so many smaller but very important identities.
Mm-hmm.
And work is a big part of that. My intimate relationship with my partner is an important part of that. If you are a parent or a child, that forms an important part of my sense of identity. And then progressively, there are so many other friendships, perhaps. There are so many pieces that complete that identity. And so, even if we did receive validation that we want to receive in one part of our life, that doesn't necessarily compensate for the validation in another part of our life. And sometimes we choose to compensate that way, but it never is satisfying enough. when we choose to compensate. That adds a layer of complexity because sometimes we choose for work to provide for validation of my identity that I feel I'm not receiving at home. This comes up in a lot of coaching relationships where a big part of why I want to spend time at work is because I'm getting the validation and I'm not getting that at home. So I'd rather just stay and spend more time at work.
Yeah. Where I prioritize spending my time is a function of where I'm being seen, and feeling like I am able to be who I am, who I think I should be, and people are recognizing that. And I'm avoiding other places where I'm not being seen or I'm not getting the validation.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Now, the other complexity that arises here is it's not just about validation, right? But it's also, so when we talk about mirroring, one part of mirroring is I want people to mirror me as I want to be mirrored.
Right. See me as I
The
want to.
way I want to be seen. See me the way I want to be seen. And I have a definition of that. And when people are not seeing me the way I want to be seen, then there are only two places where it's wrong. Either they are wrong or I'm wrong.
Either
Or there's some combination
you're saying
of the two.
either they are not seeing the real me, or the projection of how I want to be seen is inconsistent with who I am. And so therefore they're seeing accurately. It's me.
That's weird. So invariably, it creates self-doubt. Invariably, it creates self-doubt. And again, when we don't acknowledge that that's what's happening, that it's actually creating self-doubt, either in the context of a relationship or overarchingly, existentially, it's creating self-doubt, then we compensate for it in some way again. Either we withdraw from the relationship or we say, I don't need this, I know I'm right, and everybody else is wrong. And it just gets messy. And even when we compensate for it, we are never fully satisfied with any compensation mechanism. It just lives in the system, the self doubt, because it does create self doubt.
And there's no substitute. Like you're saying, if I have that doubt in a relationship at home, then by spending 95% of my time at work and getting a lot of validation, it still doesn't substitute for that relationship at home.
Right. It just doesn't. And you have to be mirrored in the context of that relationship in order to feel, more complete.
We're so needy. We need to be mirrored in all of these identities that we're holding.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Of course there's going to be somewhere we don't get mirrored.
Or I would say mirrored accurately.
I mean, that's inevitable, it feels.
Because one is the way the mirroring equation is set up, right? I want people to see me the way I want to be seen. I don't know fundamentally who I am. I may not be seeing myself accurately. And this is what we talk about when we talk about the ego, a sense of identity that I think I am rather than who I really am. I think I should be rather than who I am. A sense of identity that I think I should be rather than who I am. And so when I'm approaching my life that way, I think I should be this, which may be fundamentally
Maybe a
inaccurate.
gap.
Yeah, the very gap from who I am. So that's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is when then how people see you again is distorted by their own experiences and through the lens of their own ego that they don't necessarily reflect back to you who you are.
Right. Well, what I was thinking is it's like if you and I are interacting at work and you are looking for validation from me and I am looking for validation from you, it's like two puppets talking to each other and trying to get what they each need, but not being explicit about that. And also, you may not know exactly the type of mirror what I'm looking for, and vice versa. And so, how many relationships are we looking for that in, and how easy is it for a few of those to just miss each other? That like I'm not actually being seen in the way I want to be seen by you, and vice versa. And these can be such small things like, Hari Prasad gives a great example of him cleaning the bathroom at home and his partner coming home and not immediately giving him the validation that the bathroom is gleaming, sparkling clean, and it feels like, wow, I'm not being seen in the way that I need to be seen here. So we're being pinched all the time.
All the time, all the time. And then the compensation for it is, they say, like, so you see posts on Facebook. So Facebook is one big validation machine, right? Like, this is like, if you were to think about what's
That's why it's
happening in
so
social media,
genius.
right? They've tapped into such a fundamental human need, and the amount of insecurity that it creates, like the dependence on it. And you see this so many times. People just like break away from social media only to rejoin it again, only to break away from it again.
It sounds like it's also can't be a substitute for, like you're saying, if there's an area, an identity in your life that's not being validated, you may go and try to get some validation on social media, but it doesn't substitute again.
It doesn't really substitute. But here's the hall of distorted mirrors is where we live, right? And so it just creates so much suffering. I have projected an identity. Somebody else has projected their identity, and they are seeing me through a projected sense of their own identity. Right? It is a hall of distorted mirrors. And that's why the suffering just gets so exacerbated. It's because I want so badly to be seen and reflected back accurately. And I find myself helpless in one, doing that for myself, and in somebody else actually doing that for me accurately. But I can't live without it. Just like how I can't live without seeing myself in the mirror. I can't see my own self. That's why it's such a fundamental need. And it's when it's not met with in a healthy way, it leads to a lot of suffering. That's what we are seeing in human society. It begins from our childhood when we are not mirrored accurately by our parents, or we are not mirrored healthily by our parents. Then the need doesn't go away. The pursuit of the need only intensifies and gets distorted with time. And the way there are all so many different coping mechanisms that we adopt for this. Oh, self-validate. Like, you don't need anybody's validation except your own validation, as a way of like removing myself from the dependency.
Yeah, what's wrong with that?
The challenge is, again, it's the same thing. I can't fully see myself without a mirror. And the second thing is, even when I self validate, I might find my storehouse of self validation has been contributed to by other people.
Yeah.
Fundamentally.
It's almost like you're trying to paint over the insecurity with this pep
That's
talk,
it.
but
Yes.
it's still very fragile. And there's a lot of self-doubt that's underneath there until you can actually be seen. So you can do that up to a point, but until you're actually seen by others and mirrored in that way, it doesn't hold a lot of solid ground.
And while that pep talk may sometimes help to wean myself off of very unhealthy dependencies for validation, it doesn't necessarily fill the bucket of true mirroring, right? So while I may be able to temporarily reduce my suffering that is created by a lot of distorted mirroring, a lot of toxicity, and while I can say that, you know what, I'm just going to self validate and pull back, the suffering may reduce because I've pulled myself out of a very toxic environment. But it still doesn't, it's still not nourishing.
Yeah. Goes back to the need for healthy mirrors in our lives. Yeah.
There is no escaping that. There is really no escaping the need for healthy mirroring in our life.
Well, it's also one of the ways that the primary way we define coaching is to serve as a human mirror so that another person can actually see themselves with more clarity and help them understand the motivations and the insecurities behind their actions and their behaviors and their choices so that they can make all of those choices with greater intentionality.
Absolutely. And then what we also do as coaches is create a chain of healthy mirroring. So we as coaches have to be mirrored by people who we then can get coaching from, so that then we can healthily mirror somebody else. And that chain of healthy mirroring is what a healthy society truly has. A healthy, if you look at a healthy organization, a healthy family, what you will see is a chain of healthy mirroring happening.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we can close on this idea of, or this question. You've mentioned healthy mirroring. We've been talking about that a little bit here in this last couple of minutes. What would a healthier pursuit of validation look like? If I'm listening to this podcast and I'm thinking, okay, I need validation, that's clear. If I want to pursue that validation in a healthy way, how would I do that?
The first step lies in acknowledging that, you know what, I do need the validation. And more fundamentally, then I need somebody to actually tell me who am I and what, or not necessarily tell me, but reflect back to me, who am I and am I doing adequately?
And here there's the macro and a micro. So there's the macro understanding that I need validation in order to be seen, in order to see myself accurately. And there's the micro, so an understanding that I always need validation. That's an important need that's there. And at the micro level, oh, in this instance, as I was serving my father-in-law in this way, I realize I need a specific type of validation. So there's the macro understanding that in every situation there might be a search for validation and acknowledging, I'm feeling pinched here. Where's the source of that? What is the micro validation that I'm not getting?
Absolutely. And in the acknowledgement also lies an acceptance, a healthy acceptance that I need others to reflect back to me so that then I get to know who I am.
Yeah, a dependence,
And the interdependence of it.
an acceptance of my dependence.
That's right. Once we accept the dependence, because what we're trying to do is basically portray, oh, I don't need it, like, oh, and this is part of the reason why, again, going back to the complexity, when it does come, it also reminds us, when the validation comes, it also reminds us of how we are dependent on it. And so the way we project ourselves is like, oh, I didn't really need it. Dare you know that I so badly needed it when you're giving it to me?
I mean, the image I have here, and I share this a lot for myself, is, we are desperate for this recognition. You talked about recognition in the beginning. We're desperate for recognition, doing everything we can to get this recognition. And then I've seen myself, like, I get this recognition from someone. And I mean, to use a sports analogy, I give it the Heisman. I'm like sticking my hand out as if like, oh yeah, no, it was no big deal. It was nothing, no big deal. I'll say, and inside I'm thinking, or not even thinking, I know how much effort was put in, but I don't even know how to receive that validation that came because it feels uncomfortable. So I was thinking, it's so crazy that I'll do everything to get recognized. And then when I get recognized, I will just brush it away, brush it off as if it was nothing. And I feel uncomfortable.
Actually, it's also going back to the definition of how I think others need to see me, right? And that being a confirmation of who I think I am, when the validation comes, it also reminds me, wow, I actually doubt my own sense of self. I don't want to acknowledge that either. I just kind of sort of brush it off. Here's the problem. The problem is, then I brush it off. it doesn't go in to reinforce my sense of identity. When the compliment does come, when the mirroring does come, I reject the mirroring, right? I don't take it deep enough. And so now it
Such a
gets
crazy
messed up.
game. Such a
It's such, yeah,
I get, I don't want.
I don't want it. I don't
Now
want.
I need more.
This takes some humility to actually say, okay, I need it. And so then when I get it, I can be grateful. I can take it in. I can say, wow, thank you. I so much needed that. And when we can, it is inevitable. It is so inevitable that when somebody mirrors us, when somebody appreciates us, and we acknowledge how much we need it, there are tears in our eyes. It moves us because we experience we experience how, wow, I feel seen, right? And number two, we also acknowledge our dependency. Wow, if this weren't coming, it would be so hard, right? And there is a humility to that receiving, which is so powerful because when a compliment does come, if we are afraid that this compliment will make me too proud or something like that, and that's why I don't want to take the compliment because otherwise I'll just become proud, which is by the way false. uh, we won't become proud because we receive it with a grateful heart, with a truly humble heart. And that is the healthy way. That is the only way to pursue mirroring, as far as I can understand. The second thing is also truly having people, and it takes time to find them. And when we find them, we keep them very close. People who have worked through their own ego structure, and because they have done that, then they are actually able to mirror more accurately, right? And finding those people and keeping them very close, because those individuals can then truly mirror us, and we can go back to them with whatever context of life we are in and we are not feeling like we are being mirrored accurately. We can always look to those people to provide a more accurate mirroring because they have done the work of rising above their own ego distortions, because of which they can actually mirror us back accurately.
Yeah, in situations where we may not be getting mirrored, we can depend on these healthy mirrors in our lives to get the mirroring that we may not be getting in those situations.
In the yes,
Not this is different from the substitution where I'm trying to get mirrored in a different sphere of my life.
fear
We're
of life.
actually
Yes,
talking about getting mirrored in that exact the sphere where I'm not getting mirrored. I'm actually depending on these healthy mirrors to help, given the context, giving them the context and helping me see myself more clearly, more accurately than I might be able to with the people and environment that I'm in.
absolutely. And as coaching, what we do, our aspiration is to be that for so many people, is to mirror them in a way that starts to reflect back their true sense of identity, and through that, then empower them in in so many spheres of life.
Wow, thank you, Rasanath. So just to recap, what a healthy pursuit of validation might look like, I just want to recap what you said here in the end. One is acknowledgement, acknowledging the need for validation, and we talked about a macro need and many micro needs of validation that we have. You talked about an acceptance of this dependence that I have, which kind of follows naturally from that acknowledgement. And then you talked about receiving, when we actually receive the validation, what does it look like to really take it in versus brushing it off, and to really let your heart feel that gratitude for being seen in that way, and the effect also on the giver of that validation is dramatic, because it's taken me years to realize, like, my brushing it off is not only a disservice to me but a huge disservice to the person who is trying to convey something meaningful.
And sometimes people actually have told me this. oh, I thought you knew that already, how good you were, so you didn't need me to tell you that. Right? And sometimes that happens because they also feel that they have not been acknowledged for the compliments that they have given us over time. Anyway, that just popped up in my mind as you were sharing that.
So acknowledgement, acceptance, reception, receiving. And then you talked about, kind of separately, the importance of finding healthy mirrors and in our lives and keeping them close. People in our lives who can serve as healthy mirrors. And then in situations where I'm not getting mirrored, I can actually go back to those people and help me see myself with greater lucidity.
That's right. Very well summarized. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to close by saying I think I'm so grateful for the mirrors in my life, and you are one of the most important among them. I think that any ability that I have to be a mirror for other people, one that hopefully is not too foggy, that is because I've had very healthy mirrors in my life, and it starts with my parents. They provided me so much healthy mirroring, and then the environment, many environments that I've been fortunate to be in, but this one that we have at Upbuild, it provides such clean and clear mirroring for me, for each of us. I hope that it's a sort of treasure from which we can do all of our work. So I'm so grateful to you.
I can underscore what you said. I feel dependent on it, and I'm happy. I'm so happy and grateful for the gift that has been given to me in terms of the Upbuild team, what it does for my own life. I use the word shelter quite a bit, and this is where I experience real shelter. So thank you.
Thank you.
Right back at you. Right back at you.
Thank you, Rasanath.
Thank you, Vipin.
Thank you for listening to Upbuilding the Self. Upbuild is a leadership development company that offers workshops, coaching, and other services to help you on the path towards being your best self, free from the shackles of the ego. To learn more about our work, visit our website, upbuild.com, and sign up for our newsletter to gain access to podcasts, reflections, and upcoming events. If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes to leave us a review so that others can find and benefit from the podcast. We look forward to being with you again next time.